Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Kamini from the RSPO here. Welcome to the webinar on RSPO Child Rights Guidance. We are still waiting for a few more people to attend, and we should start shortly in maybe about 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you. Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening again. So it's already 4:08 in the evening on my clock. So I suggest that we will start with the webinar. And for those who join in later, they can perhaps have a look at the recording or have a listen to the recording, which we will put up on the website later. So without much ado, welcome everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Can we go to the next slide first? So this webinar is basically to seek public consultation or to give an introduction to the webinar, to the guidance document that we have developed here at the RSPO in collaboration with UNICEF. So how this webinar will work is basically you'll be having a welcome and a welcome remarks from me, yours truly, and general housekeeping. Then we will go on to this whole project in entirety. What was the background and the overview which has led to this development of the guidances. And then we would then subsequently move into the guidance itself, the material itself. What was the process? What was the structure leading towards this documentation? And what was the approach that our consultants took? Finally, we will talk about the public consultation process itself. How would this go on? What are we seeking to achieve? What are the objectives of the public consultation? And finally, we will end it with a Q&A session. And in that Q&A session, if you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the question box, and we will try and address them as much as possible. Next slide, please. Right, so your speakers for today, we have an all-women team here today. The first picture you see is me, of course. I'm the Human Rights and Social Standards Manager in the RSPO Secretariat. My name is Kamini Viswanathan. I was a lawyer in my past life, and I have been working in the RSPO for the past 4 years in this capacity or portfolio. We also have with us experts in the field of child rights who are Ines, who is the Executive Director from CCR-CSR, Riri, or Siti or Riri, who is a project coordinator from CCR-CSR, and finally Melissa Chin, who is a principal project manager from ProForest. So throughout the webinar today, all four of us will be presenting separately on the subject matter. And at the end of the day, we will all be open to questions and answers, which you may put in the question box. So moving along, general housekeeping rules. As you might have heard earlier as you joined in, participants of the webinar will be automatically set to mute. If you wish to speak or ask a question at any stage during the webinar, please type it in the question box, and we will try to get to all the questions. If, however, we are unable to answer the questions today, we will take note of it. It will be recorded, and we will aim to provide a response within the next few days via email. The structure of the webinar today will allow for presentations from each of the speakers, and it will be followed by a Q&A session thereafter. And as I mentioned earlier, what we will do is we will record this webinar and with the aim of sharing it on the website itself. So where you see the public consultation announcement, on that page itself, we will add on this recording, so you can always refer to it should you have any doubts of the entire project or the draft guidances. So ladies and gentlemen, the objective of this webinar is to introduce the background, scope, and objective of the guidance document, to introduce the structure and the specific approaches that we have used for each of the guidance documents which you have already seen on the website, and finally to explain the format of the public consultation and the time frame within which we hope to achieve, to gain input from everybody. So about the project. In 2016, UNICEF conducted a research on the palm oil sector and how it impacts children in Indonesia. So the idea was that when UNICEF went into the plantations in Indonesia, it was to discover what were the impacts as a whole of the palm oil industry on the children that surrounded or are affected by the industry. Through this study, they identified 7 impact areas in relation to children in the palm oil plantation. And these 7 impact areas were in relation to maternity protection and breastfeeding, childcare, nutrition and healthcare, housing, water, sanitization and hygiene, or WASH as it's known, access to education, child protection, and child labor and young workers. So I just want to stop here and just explain to everybody. This was really interesting when we read the report, because the general assumption that we have, or the key assumptions that we work on, is that when you think about a particular industry, the first thing that strikes you is the child itself, and then you go directly to thinking, okay, children are working on the plantation. But this study helped us discover that there's so many things that can happen before the child ends up on the plantation. And similarly, there's so many risks that are involved. And I think the first one, when it comes to maternity protection and breastfeeding, this was really interesting because it's an indirect impact area. Indirect in the sense that the first person who receives the benefits or the effects is actually the mother. But because the mother, for instance, does not get maternity protection or is not accorded this maternity protection, she then is unable to breastfeed her child because she needs to go to work. And as a result of that, the child loses out on, those formative months and being deprived of, such a natural thing. So similarly, these impact areas were explained in detail in this particular report, which has been referenced to in the guidance documents. And I would, advise everyone to actually have a read to better understand what are the direct impacts and what is child rights. So that document really gives a very good explanation of how it correlates from one thing to another. Next slide, please. So moving from that, after the study was done, RSPO entered into a memorandum of understanding with UNICEF. And stemming from this, we entered into an MOU, and it was based on the common commitment of both UNICEF and the RSPO towards the realization of child rights in the palm oil sector. And a part of this commitment from both UNICEF and RSPO was to implement the Child Rights and Business Principles Program, or the CRP Program, for palm oil plantations in Indonesia. So the aim of this program was to provide education and knowledge to estate managers and staff on the ground. So we were looking at knowledge building. We were also looking at gathering information on what are the impacts on the children on the ground. And this wasn't just negative impacts. These were positive impacts as well. With the idea of it was that we are going down on the ground. Having known that these are the impacts, we were going down to the ground to socialize these potential impacts and to see what are companies already doing to mitigate these potential impacts, and to have a very open discussion with people who are directly and indirectly involved with the growth of the children as well as in their everyday life. So it was very interesting because we interviewed doctors, we spoke to teachers, visited schools, spoke to the management to see how exactly children are being impacted in general. What was the childcare facilities? We even spoke to the children themselves. Right, and this had resulted in a document, a report, which again is available on the website, and you can read to see what the outcomes were. All right, so as you can see in the slide, the program also aimed to discover the best practices relating to these 7 impact areas, and a lot of this information that we had gained from the CRBP program, as well as from the study that was conducted in Indonesia, was fed into the PNC as you see it today, the 2018 principles and criteria in the RSPO. But however, we realized that this was not just enough. This was not enough. Having our principles and criteria updated, we still need to see this materialize on the ground. And we also realized, I think one very important realization was that it takes a village to bring up a child. So it's not just solely the responsibility of one party alone. And it needs to, this risk mitigation of risk as well as protection of children needs to happen on all levels in the supply chain. So realizing this, both UNICEF and RSPO came to this conclusion that we need to help guide members move towards this. And it wasn't only going to be for the producers. We evaluated to look across the entire supply chain to see where exactly are the pressure points, where are the pain points when it comes to children on the plantation, and where are the risks and where are the safeguards that we can put in place. So based on this, we made a call to develop the guidance for this four stakeholders to mitigate these risks. So what are the objectives of this guidance documents, or what are the objectives we hope to achieve through these guidance documents? One is to guide RSPO members to improve business policies and practices for children, working parents, and the surrounding communities, based on the 2018 PNC requirements regarding the protection of children. And you will see in the document how we have aligned the safeguards when it comes to children to the specific PNC criteria. And another objective of the guidance document is to provide tailored support and serve as an entry point for these interventions that seek to minimize the potential negative consequence and improve the livelihood of children and communities in which they live. So this was the main objectives. A call was put out, and both CCR, CSR, and ProForest answered this call. And together with UNICEF, we have come up with this guidance document. So I'll stop there, and I'll pass over the room to Ines to continue to talk about the guidance development.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kamini, for this introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Really, I'm happy to see that so many people are on this call and interested to give us some feedback on this guidance. Now, maybe I can start with the first introducing the two organizations that Kamini just has mentioned, who have been working on this document for a couple of months now. So CCI-CSR is the Center for Child Rights and Corporate Social Responsibility. We are a social enterprise based in Hong Kong as well as in China, but we do have offices in Yangon and do a lot of work and have our staff in Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Laos, and just work all over the Asia Pacific region. We are focusing our business on consulting businesses and companies on child rights in their supply chains in particular. And as such, we have quite a bit of experience and expertise in helping companies to improve their direct and indirect impact on children, and really find ways to strengthen their sustainable business, because obviously children are kind of the essence of sustainability, as they are our future. And so currently we're implementing child business projects in China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Indonesia. We are just starting our first projects in India, and we actually also do some work in Turkey. And we were very happy to be able to tackle this task of this guidance together with Proforest. Proforest is an independent organization that work mainly on natural resource management and specialize in practical approaches to sustainability. They come with a lot of expertise around palm oil, and so that has been very, very helpful. But they do cover all aspects of natural resource sector. So they work on sustainable forestry, agriculture, commodities production, but also have a lot of experience and expertise in responsible sourcing, supply chain management, and investment. A little bit similar as we are doing on the child rights side, Proforest is working very directly with companies to implement responsible production, sourcing, and investment for agriculture and forest commodities, together with long-term programs and support capacity building, multi-stakeholder sustainability initiatives, etc. They are also very much on the ground where things happen and try to bring change and expertise in these areas. Proforest has offices in Malaysia, Brazil, Colombia, Ghana, and the UK. So that's just a very quick background so that you understand who are the organizations behind that. Now, I'm just going to talk very quick before Riri will take over and to present more details, and Miriam and Melissa will take over to present more details. I just want to maybe take one point of departure. So Kamini has just explained all the key child rights impact that UNICEF study has identified, and that obviously was a key area that we started from. And as you will see when looking at the guidances, or if you already had a chance to look at it, it follows a lot of times, the structure follows those key areas. Then we use a lot of references around child rights and human rights, such as the UN Guiding Principles, the UNICEF Child Safeguarding Principles for Business, but also UNICEF's report on palm oil and children in Indonesia, which was these were the key documents that we used on top of the 2018 RSPO principle and criteria to bring together this this guidance. Now, this guidance has absolutely no intention, and I hope this comes through, to create new criteria or new principles or principles on top of the 2018 RSPO principles and criteria collection. It's really the idea that we take a specific angle, and that's the one of child rights, and try to give information, practical advice to the different stakeholders and the different change makers in the business on how they can use the RSPO principle and criteria to strengthen children's rights throughout the palm oil sector. So the idea is not to create another set of standards, etc., but just using these standards, which we think are very strong and already have a lot of elements that actually contribute and promote the rights of children. And what the guidance does is to call this out and to make this a bit more visible in that. And because also we see, and you will see that when you look at the guidance, and Melissa and Riri will talk about that in more detail, but we really can link all those elements around child rights, we can link them directly with the principles and criteria that you find in the 2018 RSPO standards. So we do have in those guidances, we put in examples and show kind of practical elements and how businesses can go about this and implement those questions. To give you maybe an example, obviously we often, the first thing we think of child labor, we think of when we think of child rights, we think of child labor. And so when we're looking at child labor in this guidance, we obviously rely fully on the principles and criteria around child labor, but we also show how this links to other elements. So for example, we do discuss payment structures and wages, because if we have a situation where a parent cannot make a decent living through the piece rate or the rate by kilo that he or she is receiving when working on a palm oil plantation, then that mother or that father will be maybe very likely to, for example, ask his children or her children to come and help and add on to the work. And so obviously then talking about what kind of payment structures we have, whether or not there is a decent salary, is directly linked to whether or not we can actually implement and follow the no child labor guidance that the principles and the criteria give. And so through these kind of practical considerations, we're trying within the guidances to give everyone that is working within the supply chain kind of support and examples and practical guidelines how to really implement the principles and the criteria. So if you so throughout these impact areas that Kamini has already mentioned, from child protection, child labor, education, maternity protection, childcare, health, nutrition, water, sanitation, hygiene, we then link this with the key elements of the RSPO principles and criteria, just the protection of children and reproductive rights, the prohibition of child labor, the provision of educational amenities, provision of safe working environment. All of those are already in the principles and criteria, and you see this list here, and it's by no means a complete list. A complete list you will see is quite comprehensive. That's why it's a whole guidance book. But be using those to show how this can contribute so that we can, within the palm oil sector, create a positive impact in children. And that's ultimately the goal of these guidances. So when you look at them, when you read them, and when you hear them now, what we really would like to hear from you, hopefully, is like, do you think, if you see, oh, but these guidances are, or we would need more information, or it's not clear, or I wouldn't know actually how to implement that, then that's things we would want to improve in the guidance, because the goal of this guidance is that it's a very practical tool that can be a basis for training, a basis for capacity building, but it can also just be really used by plantation managers and by auditors, etc., and all the different people involved in the supply chain, to see how can we do a better job to make sure that the whole palm oil industry is working towards creating a positive impact on children, and definitely not a negative one. So this is the goal of these guidances, and I hope that it is helpful, and I hope that through this consultation, as public consultation, we can get feedback from you, where you're telling us whether we actually achieve that goal, or how we could, what changes we could make to better achieve that goal. So that's just a little bit of background from my side before we get more into the descriptives on how these the guidances look like. So I'm handing over now to Melissa and Riri for the next section.
Thank you so much, Ines. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Riri. So I will pick up the explanation, which goes more into the development process. Now we want to show you where we come from, what have been done until we can reach to the point that doing this webinar as a public consultation process. So we started last year, July last year, where we did an RSPO member survey. I believe that many of you received that by the email blast sent by RSPO. In that survey, we tried to find more information on the good business practice, the challenges that are faced by different actors within the palm oil industry, including smallholders, the palm oil producers, retailers, auditors, and etc. And after that, in August until October, we did like thorough this desk review. We looked at the national laws, the published reports, of course, the 2016 UNICEF reports, but in addition to that, we also looked at many other documents. And we see like the good practice. We try to check whether it relates and can be implemented into the guidance later on. And we started the development of a research brief, which was published last month by RSPO. I can tell more about it later, in November and December. So starting early like this year, and also by the end of last year, we had a lot of stakeholder consultations and also key informant interviews. We virtually talk with some of you, I believe, not only in Asia, but also in Latin America, even in Africa. We try to speak to as many people as possible, which are related to the development of this guidance, to make sure that we can really capture the situation there, and that the suggestions, the steps that we provide in the guidance are on point and practical to be used by different actors. And we started the development of the guidance documents that we are having now, the draft for you to have a look, in February until around 4 months until May 2020. And during these 4 months, we developed all 4 guidance, and we did some internal discussions, and we also consult with some of the stakeholders, including the auditors, like certification bodies, to make sure that the draft that you are looking right now is good enough for you to comment on and to provide inputs and also suggestion to us to finalize it later. And now, starting the mid-June, 17th of June to be exact, until 17th of July, 30 days, we are doing this public consultation online. Melissa later on will explain more about the public consultation format, time frame, and also some of the things that we hope you can look at and how to submit feedback to us. And lastly, we hope to finalize and publish these 4 guidance documents in August. Yeah, that's just to give you an overview on how the development of this guidance before we have this public consultation today. And these are the main outputs of the CCR, CSR, and Profora's work for the past months. First of all, like I mentioned before, is the research brief. We took 3 months to finalize this research brief. We didn't go to the field, but we read so many desktop so many reports, so many guidelines, and also talked to different people, like different stakeholders, to know more about the good business practice. And inside this research brief, palm oil business operations impact on children's right, we are not only talking about Indonesia and Malaysia, who we know is the top 2 producing countries, but also we try to find more information from countries like Thailand, Nigeria, and also Colombia, to make sure that we capture the other areas that are also producing palm oil. And inside this research brief, we also put information that we can gather on the good business practice, whether it's on maternity protection, child labor, wash, nutrition, health, and so on. And if you see here the 4 guidance, these are the guidance that we developed, and we will go into more detail after this on the content, the approach that we use to each of these guidance to make sure that it is tailored to the need of the targeted stakeholders. The first one is the guidance for palm oil producers. maize plantation. And the second one is the guidance for downstream supply chain actors like retailers, the consumer good manufacturers, traders. This is the guidance for them. And the third one is the guidance for auditors and certification bodies. And last but not least is the guidance for the smallholders and group managers. If you see that these 4 documents, we tried our best to really develop it with the approach that will be practical for each of the stakeholders. Okay, even though there are 4 guidance documents that we are talking now, that we are discussing, but actually we do have like the same approach, same soul, I can say. The first one is the child rights within the context of palm oil. So we start off all the guidance documents with a brief explanation on what is children's right actually. In this part, we explain more about right to participate, right for survival, and there are so many others that we try to capture, even though it's brief, but at least it gives a sense of what is constituted as children's rights. And then it follows with the how palm oil sectors actually impact children, to give a sense on different 7 impact areas in affecting children's life in the palm oil supply chain. And it's not that everything we put there that it makes it a very thick guidance. We suggest you to refer back to the research brief or the reports that we took reference from when it comes to the palm oil sector's impact on children. But we did put the very important point there and the challenges and also the steps how to address it. And the second approach, the general approach that we use, is we list down the general principles that all stakeholders must look at. The first one, of course, is the best interest of the child. On how all actions impacting children, the best interest of the children should be the guiding principle, which means that any decision-making process, child protection, or preservation of well-being or right to live and grow should be prioritized. And we also put do not harm, sustainability, non-discrimination, etc. So there are a set of principles that you can have a look in the beginning of 3 guidance, and especially in the, but particularly in the certification bodies and auditors, we kind of merge it with the role of the auditors later on in chapter 2. Melissa can talk more about that. And the last one, the general approach that we take to all 4 guidance is the 7 child rights impact areas, which Kamini, I believe, and also Ines have explained to you since the beginning of this webinar on the child protection, child labor until WASH. So there are 7 impact areas that we are looking at. So this guidance is beyond child labor issues. So it's trying to be comprehensive and covering the other child rights impact areas. So let us go to the first guidance, which is the guidance on child rights for palm oil producers. So besides the general approach that I just mentioned before, this guidance, specifically the palm oil producer, we provide guidance on addressing the 7 impact areas in the context of PNC. We started off each chapter with descriptions on the challenges in the field when it comes to different impact areas. For example, like childcare, what are the challenges in the grassroots level? Or when it comes to child labor and young workers, what are the challenges? Not only to the children who has kind of identity, but also the situation where there are a lot of migrant children in the palm oil plantation. So we also zoom into different challenges for different 7 impact areas. And then after that, it is followed with steps. So what are the practical steps based on good business practice that we have collected through stakeholders consultation and also desk research? We put it there, some steps that you can do as a palm oil producer on how you can protect children in your supply chain, be it their access to education, or their access to healthcare and nutrition, or their access to safe access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. So we put it there, and we also kind of, like putting the preventative mechanisms and also like the protective mechanisms and also the remediation measures that you can take. The second approach to the palm oil producers is it really builds and adapts from the existing best practice guidelines. You can have a look at later, but in the reference, we put very clearly that where we pick up those suggestions or steps, like from UNICEF, IFC, ILO, or WHO guidance. And in regards to the best practice, we also not only drawing from palm oil industry sector, but also from the other agriculture commodity. For example, we cannot find a good business practice, particularly like, for example, for housing, like in palm oil industry. And we will try our best to find the good business practice from the other commodity, like the tea sector or coffee sector, that we can draw upon and put it into the guidance. And the last one is the good practice examples. So we have these boxes that you can have a look later on the actual programs that have been implemented throughout the world. The second guidance is the downstream supply chain actors. So again, in addition to the three general approach that I mentioned in the beginning, there are also specific approach that we use for this guidance. Because we want to make sure that the downstream supply chain actors like the retailer, the consumer good manufacturers, they can have hands-on and also practical stuff to begin with. So the first one is we provide guidance for downstream actors to safeguard child rights when implementing RSPO standards. We provide 8 key steps to protect children's rights in the palm oil supply chains. It doesn't need to be in sequence. From like step 1 to step 8, you don't need to really follow 1, 2, 3 until 8. You can pick up, you can do it like randomly depending on your needs and also your situation in the supply chain. So these key steps, including remediation of child labor, on how you can strengthen your recruitment process, including age verification mechanisms, including how to check documents, which documents you have to check, how is the filing, and also how to make a fair pricing and purchasing strategies to make sure that the workers until the deeper or the lowest level of the supply chain, the workers have decent living wage and also have decent standard of living and can send their kids to school. So these 8 key steps we developed based on the consultation again and also the desk research that we did. And the second and third one is the buyer level matrix, which consists of 2 things. The first one is the process matrix. The second one is the outcomes metrics. So what is the process metrics? It's basically provide you kind of a checklist. So it will be very hands-on for you to begin with. Okay, where should I start when I want to protect children in my supply chain according to the RSPO standards? Okay, I have to do step 1. Okay, step 1 is what? We provide the checklist that you can just tick and you can implement. You can self-assess yourself whether actually you have that system in place. If not, then maybe you can take an action to implement it. And then this one is completed with the outcomes metrics. So after you have this hands-on checklist, then you need to know whether you've done good enough and how you can measure your success or how you can know that you need to improve in which part. And that's why we developed the outcomes metrics. We adapted this outcomes metric from many prominent guidelines, including from UNICEF, WHO, WBCSD, which provides these metrics to each of the impact areas and still linked to RSPO standards. So we always linked back to RSPO standards, and like Ines mentioned, we are not creating new things, new standards or new indicators, but we are pulling out and calling out the children's rights perspective and also requirements that is already in the RSPO guidance, RSPO PNC, what I mean. Now, I'll hand over to Melissa to pick up from here.
Thank you, Riri. So good afternoon, everyone. I will continue from here to speak briefly about the remaining 2 guidance documents and then move on to explain the public consultation process. So in the guidance for smallholders and group managers, similar to what Riri has explained in the producer guidance, the document is broken down to the 7 impact areas and explained in the context of how they directly or indirectly link to the requirements in the RSPO Independent Smallholder Standard. So the document provides an overview about why the impact areas are important and provides recommendations on how they can be addressed as part of the smallholder standard. Like the other documents where best practice guidelines exist, such as those developed by UNICEF, ILO, and others on issues such as maternity protection or WASH, these are also referred to and adapted for the Palm Oil context. The guidance also takes note that the situation in the smallholder setting is quite different from a commercial one where children could be assisting or working alongside parents or family members who either own the farm or are employed to work on the farm. Children may also be accompanying their parents to the farm but may not be participating in any work tasks. It also takes into consideration that the capacity and the resource constraints that smallholders may have. Therefore, the focus on the guidance is really about building understanding and awareness of child rights issues among smallholders and group managers, understanding what the risks are and where the risks lie, who should be protected, and the potential relationships between farming practices and how it can directly or indirectly impact on children's development and well-being. So the guidance also focuses a lot and takes into account on the important role that group managers play as the coordinator, the facilitator, as well as the resource and training provider for smallholders. And therefore, we try to explore ways that group managers can support smallholders in terms of providing or facilitating relevant training, initiating programs, providing access to resources and information, as well as being a convener of sorts in the sense that they can facilitate and convene collaborative partnerships like through landscape initiatives with other stakeholders and so forth. Next slide, please. For the guidance for auditors is structured a little bit differently from the previous 3 guidance. This is meant to increase the auditor's understanding on child rights and supports the audit team in applying a child rights lens where relevant so that they can carry out the audits better when it comes to identifying issues around children. As Riri and Ines also mentioned, this guidance is not meant to create a different set of requirements for auditors when auditing. At the end of the day, the intent is to help auditors be more adept at linking their audit observations and findings in a way that can better identify a risk of child rights issues in accordance to the PNC. For example, if they were to come across incidences of child labor. So aside from the 7 impact areas, we have also included a chapter on how auditors can safeguard child rights when they conduct audits. So we outline a list of ethical considerations which I think would be commonplace among auditors anyway, but it's just to serve as a reminder about some sensitivities involved when you are involving children, for example, putting their interests first, taking a do no harm approach, and also respecting the rights to privacy and confidentiality of the child and their family. So we also provide recommendations on the audit team composition, how to respond in case child labor is discovered, and some basic guidelines for communicating with children. So for example, if an auditor were to come across a young worker who is suspected to be underage, as in like could be below 18 years old, how would the auditor approach or make initial contact to confirm the identity and age, as well as other information like work type and work hours, to determine if, let's say, the work conditions are compliant with the local laws and PNC, and also on how to be able to verify the age of the worker. There are overlaps between the 4 documents. I mean, if you listen to both Ines, Riri, and myself, you will see that, you know, there are actually a lot of overlapping content between the 4 documents, but, you know, with different perspective and focus to sort of like tailor it to the target audience. So some information and recommendations in the tools provided in the 4 documents could be relevant to you, whether you're a producer, an auditor, a group manager, or even like a downstream company. And cross-references between the documents are also made where applicable. So you could be reading one guidance document, and it will also make references to other tools in other guidance documents if, let's say, you're interested to find out more. So you can also cross-refer. Next slide, please. Okay, so the public consultation, this is the first actually, this is the first time that RSPO is conducting a public consultation for guidance documents. This is due to a recent SOP by the RSPO Secretariat to subject guidance documents that are developed to support compliance to the PNC. This is to ensure usefulness of the guidance developed, so that, you know, we want to also ensure that the guidance are useful and they are not developed in isolation. And also to obtain sort of like buy-in from members, because they are the ones who are going to use these guidance documents. So therefore, this is the first set of guidance that's sort of like subject to public consultation. And the purpose of this consultation actually is threefold. Firstly is to obtain feedback, of course, from members. The feedback, the importance of the feedback is to help us improve the clarity and relevance of the information given in the guidances. And the public consultation exercise, finally, also, we would like to use this opportunity to raise awareness of these guidance documents, so they could be more widely referenced and used. Next slide, please. Since this is not a normative document, these guidance documents will only be subject to one round of consultation, and it will be for 30 days. You can download the drafts from the RSPO website. I believe that RSPO has already put up an announcement, and an email blast have also been sent with the links where the drafts are at. Otherwise, you know, when these slides are made available, you can also click on the link provided. The consultation feedback will be submitted online. So we have created a online platform to receive this feedback. We are using Question Pro. It's kind of like a similar platform to Monkey Survey, if you're more familiar with that. So it's quite easy to use, and a lot of the questions are in multiple choice format. Next slide, please. Like all feedback forms, we will start with some general information. So you just need to provide a name and the organization that you represent. And you also can select the document that you would like to submit comments on. As you can see, we have only provided one link. So via this link, you can access all the forms. for the respective documents. So if you look, I'm not sure how well you can see the screenshot, but you can select which guidance documents you wish to give feedback. And depending on what you select, the relevant questions for that particular document will appear. So you can select more than one document if, let's say, you want to provide feedback to more than one document. However, this is quite important, there is no save function. So if, let's say, you want to provide your feedback for more than one document, please ensure that you have enough time to do so in one sitting. Otherwise, you can always come back again to the same link, click on the different guidance document and provide feedback. Then you can actually do this repeatedly for the various documents. So that's something to take note of. Like I said earlier, it's more like a multiple choice format. So you'll be asked to score the overall document and sections of the document for clarity and relevance. So how we have broken down the form is by sections and subsections of the document, asking users to sort of like rank or score each section, whether or not it's clear, it's relevant, or whether something is, you know, true, partially true, or not true. So for example, if you say like, is this section, the recommendations for this section, is it easily adaptable for your business operations? Then you can select true, partially true, or not true. We also have questions where we ask overall, if, let's say, the recommendations and the good practice examples provided is easily adaptable for your operations, and you can select whether yes, majority of it can be adapted, or no, only half or less than half. So it's like multiple choice in that sense, but then you will also be invited to provide additional comments for answers where, let's say, you have provided a less than satisfactory scoring. So for example, for the producer document, you have ranked a particular section as being not clear or not relevant to you. In order for us as the receivers of the feedback to be able to address it constructively and to improve the gaps that you have highlighted, it'll be good if you also provide explanation on why you felt that particular section was not clear or not relevant. I mean, without that additional explanation as to why you gave it a less than satisfactory scoring, it'd be very difficult for us to try to address your concerns. So, you know, wherever you can to provide additional elaboration, it'll be most helpful to the development team. Finally, you can also submit any general remarks, comments, or suggestions, including good practice examples. So if, for example, if you think we have overlooked to mention a particular good practice example that has been, you know, used by the sector, please feel free to also, you know, highlight that. Next slide. So we have come to the end of the presentation, and we have about 30 minutes left for any Q&A. If, let's say, you have any questions about the public consultation process after this webinar, or if, let's say, you face any issues, maybe you have difficulties assessing the online feedback form or submitting your feedback online, please feel free to to send an email to Kamini at the RSPO Secretariat, as she's the project lead for this work. So yeah, so please do send in any inquiries that you may have, or any difficulties that you have faced with the public consultation. So with that, I would like to hand the floor back to Kamini to moderate the questions and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, and thanks everyone for the presentations. I see some comments coming in right now and questions. I am going to maybe give everyone some time to think about any questions that you may have, and to put it in the question box. And what we will do then, we would just answer the questions as they come. And if you have any questions or any burning questions that you want to ask any of the panelists in particular, you can also just let us know in the question box. Who do you want to direct these questions to? So why don't you go ahead and put in the questions, and I will look through the questions panes as well and start asking questions. So we have one question here, and I think Melissa, maybe you might be able to give a brief to this. The question asks, do these documents make a difference to the approach for RSPO audits? And what is the connection or the final relationship between the final document and the RSPO PNC?
Thanks. So the approach that we have taken with not just with the auditor's documents, but with the others as well, is that we always link it to the RSPO PNC. So whatever the RSPO PNC requires, we follow that. We do not actually ask to sort of add more requirements, as Ines and we mentioned also. This is not a reinterpretation of the PNC where we provide, let's say, a more expanded interpretation, but we do provide sort of like recommendations and suggestions to auditors to take a more like child rights lens approach when they do the audit, and this is usually by just linking the impact areas together, like how Ines said that, it's not like really looking at it in isolation, taking a very checklist type approach, that when we talk about child labor, we also talk about, how this links to wages. So like with the auditor guidance, and this was something that we struggled with, and also we spoke to some auditors and also with ASI. So, we would also appreciate, any feedback that you have with the current draft, is to how to make it useful to the auditors without making it seem as though we're introducing a new requirement, because this is absolutely not it. Like, so for example, like in the auditor's document, we provide suggestions on like, how, for example, if you want to approach a young worker trying to determine whether or not they are underage, because maybe they look underage to you, what kind of tools and what kind of approach, what kind of questions you would ask. So how you would phrase your questions, because it would be different from interacting with an adult. So those are the kinds of things that, we're trying to provide additional guidance to help you be able to sort of like identify the risk better, or maybe just to ask questions that you not think of asking before, but it's by no means sort of like expanding, the requirements of the PNC. And also when we drafted the auditor guidance document, we also did cross-check with the PNC audit questionnaire that the Secretariat has developed.
I think just to add on to that as well, the entire objective or intent of all the documents, all 4 documents actually, is to sort of build an awareness around this subject matter, to say that, okay, in your operations, what are the things that I can do to ensure that these kind of risks are not affecting the children on the ground. So I think that was the underlying intent in why we and how we went about this development of the document, as well as how both at RSPO and the UNICEF we saw that everyone has a role to play. What we need to do now is to give you that tools and give you that guidances as to how you can effectively carry out that role. So I hope this answers your question. There's another question here, which is quite interesting. Is there any reason why there are 4 guidance documents? I understand that it's targeted for 4 different stakeholders, but will it not work if one guidance document addresses all stakeholders? So maybe Ines, you'd want to take this question?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Kamini. Yeah, so the reason why we ended up doing 4, which obviously made our workload much bigger than we thought, but we just felt that we really want to be relevant and practical to the different kind of stakeholders and how they can look at child rights. And we did feel that it's very different what kind of you can do to support and promote children's rights if you're a buyer, what you can do if you are a bigger palm oil producer, or what you can do if you are a smallholder farm or if you're an auditor. And so we just felt it would become a really big document, and then with a lot of like, if you can do that, you can do that, and with a lot of ifs. And we thought it's going to be much easier to create documents that talk more directly to the different situations and the different stakeholders and what their role within that could be. As just also linked to the last question, right? How can auditors within the framework of RSPO, without changing the audit approach, but obviously we make always decisions when we do audits, and so how can we kind of support to really have that lens and to look at some of these guidances with kind of the perspective of what is the impact here on children and what are the risks here on children. Same thing with smallholders. Obviously, smallholders might have different situations than a bigger producer. They don't have the same level of management and systems involved. They often deal with much smaller number of people, which also then has implications on how they tackle challenges. And so we wanted to make sure that we don't give guidances that are just irrelevant or not applicable to a smallholder farm, and then have guidances that we feel like, yes, from bigger producers, that's what we can expect, and that's what we could expect, for example, from an international buyer on how they can push forward this this child rights agenda. So therefore, those 4 guidances, and hopefully it will not necessarily make it too much. I fully understand if all of you who are helping with this consultation, and take the one that you think is closest to you, most relevant to you, and we'll be extremely grateful to receive response on one. I understand it might not be that easy to look at 4, but as Kamini also said, there is overlap. There is obviously similar areas, but we just wanted to make them very practical documents that don't require a lot of work from your side to find what is relevant if you are, for example, an auditor or if you're a buyer. So I hope that answered your question.
Right, thank you, Ines. So there was a question in relation to who can comment on this document, who can provide their input. This is open to everyone, and that includes both RSPO and non-RSPO members. So if you have an interest in this subject matter, please feel free to comment and pass it along to your colleagues who think might be able to provide provide input into this as well. I have another question here, which asks, as this guidance is not normative, how would auditors act if they find the unit of certification is not so much in line with the content of guidances? Before I pass this on to the other panelists, I think just to let everyone know, again, this guidances again is to help you move towards taking a child rights based approach in your production, in your supply chain, etc., etc. So the compliance of PNC will still be audited as it was. It just takes this guidance just gives you a prescription or advice on how do you move forward. Is there anyone else who would want to take on or answer add on? Yeah, sure.
If you want me to, if you want me to add just a few things, and you will see it when you look at the auditor guidance in particular. I think hopefully the guidance will kind of answer that question. But to give an example, right? So we do have within the RSPO principles and criteria, we have them, I think it's 6.4, that says that children should not be employed or exploited, and it has indicators that say, for example, that the unit to be certified needs to have policy. And so what the guidance does is talk about this a little bit more and say, well, look at the policy, and one of the results then could just be, the policy is not sufficient or is insufficient, and we're making points on how to see that. For example, if the compulsory education in that area is until 14, and somehow the guidance says children are only allowed to work at the age of 15 or 16, then you can point that out as maybe some issues or challenges in the policy. And that is obviously a detail, but it will kind of, are the details that could potentially then help us or help the unit to be certified to create policies that are taking more into account, taking child rights more into account and creating better systems. So most of the time, the normal auditing process will allow you to basically call that out, and all the guidance does is kind of putting attention of the auditors to those issues. There is a paragraph, we do have a paragraph where we do recommend to auditors that if they do observe severe child rights and protection or abuse issues, that they will make a special report to RSPO. And you can give us feedback on that and how you think that could work. So it's basically if you come across and you don't necessarily have the proof, but as an auditor, you're pretty certain something's off here. I think some children are at danger here, that you do have a way of notifying RSPO and say, could we maybe take a look? Maybe a child rights organization could go in and take another look. It's beyond potentially your task as an auditor looking at the site, but something just doesn't add up and leaves you with a bad feeling. So we want to kind of have that opportunity, but this is also, I think, a process that we started with this guidance, and Kamini, you can correct me, that RSPO is also looking into, and obviously your thoughts and feedbacks when looking at the documents will be very helpful for us for RSPO to continue on that path and seeing how we can align those different tasks, and obviously with very much understanding that an auditor goes in with a very clear guideline, a very clear scope on what your job is, and we don't mean that auditors now have to become social workers. So that is absolutely not the point, but that you just kind of be so from a child rights perspective, and in our organizations we have seen that there is a lot of difference in how auditors and how good auditors are in kind of discovering and seeing issues around child rights, even such kind of blatant issues like child labor. And that often depends a lot on how well kind of the auditors are aware and have been trained on those issues. And hopefully these guidances can, as such, kind of sensitize all the auditors going into the plantations.
Right, thank you, Ines. There's another question here, which is, to what extent will this document adjust to national regulations? In Indonesia, for instance, in their regulations regarding childcare standards, and can this be adopted to strengthen this guidance? So this was a question that was asked. I think before I hand it on to the other panelists, you would have noticed that we have taken an approach to see what are the policies, the regulations, and the procedures that are in place throughout most of the palm oil producing countries in where our members operate. And I think throughout the guidances, you will see that there have been best practices or references to those specific regulations as well. Specifically into the national regulations, references have been made, but I think this takes it one step above. Does anyone want to jump in to add on to that?
Yes, Kamini, if I can add to your question, your answer just now. So basically, since we began to develop the research brief, maybe you can also have a look at that document. We took seriously the national laws in the 5 top producing countries. So even in the beginning we started off with the development of this guidance, we have looked at the national legislations, especially in the countries where they, like massively producing and this palm oil. So to what extent will this document adjust to national regulations? We picked it up. You can see like in the citations, and also in the general principles, there is one principles where we say aim for stronger protection rights. So it is very important to always comply with the national, provincial, or even local laws and regulations that related to the child rights protections and also the labor rights. But need to remember as well that where such legal protection at the national or local level or provincial level is absent or weak, it is very recommended to refer to the international and or industry best practice guidelines, standards or principles such as the UNGPs, ILO core conventions to really identify the measures that is appropriate for strengthening the protection. So yes, you can always refer to the childcare standards with respect to Indonesian law, but when it comes to the law is absent or weak, please do refer to the industry best practice or the international standards on that.
Yeah, and I think that we were very cautious to do like they pointed Riri pointed out in the national regulations to see what are the already available protection and how do we scale it up if necessary, or does it provide sufficient protection. Again, aligning to the PNC 2018 as one of the main sources of references. So that's another interesting question. I mean, if we're talking about national interpretations and national regulations again, the question is, how do these guidance documents compare with other palm oil production standards like MSPO and ISPO? What are the similarities and differences? Melissa, do you want to take that?
Sure. Thanks for that question. So we actually didn't make any comparisons with the national standards of MSPO and ISPO because after all, this work was commissioned by the RSPO and our reference point really is the RSPO PNC. So that has always been our focus. And also because as Kamini explained earlier on, about how this guidance documents actually, is an evolution of the work and collaboration that RSPO and UNICEF had since 2016. So that's why we really, try to build on that work as much as possible with a very specific RSPO focus. So we actually did not make any comparisons to MSPO and ISPO, but others are of course they can feel free to make those comparisons or benchmarking as well.
Thank you, Melissa. And one last question. Is there any reward from RSPO if a producer can set up the conditions and facilities exactly the same as the guidance said? Well, as of now, no, we have not planned for anything as such, but this is an interesting suggestion that we can think and move forward from here, and perhaps that it would facilitate more members to move in this direction. Then why not? But as of now, no, we don't have any reward system for complying with the standards or following this guidance. Okay, this is an interesting question. There's work on the decent living wages for Indonesia. The question is, would these guidelines sync with the outcome? Ideally, yes. So if you would see through the guidance document that we have developed, the 4 guidance documents, they are all interlinked. Similarly, from the RSPO, we are working very hard to come up with tools as well as relevant guidances in relation to the human rights standards in the RSPO PNC. So similarly, we have a few things in the pipeline, and that even includes a gender guidance, an FPIC, revised FPIC guidance, and a lot of work that we're doing in relation to decent living wages. So the idea is that everything that we do, we need to make sure that the overlaps are smooth, that they are in sync, everything is in sync, and we are giving you something which is applicable across the board. So yes, this is something that we would have to take into consideration and make sure that there are, the interlinkages are very clear in the documents that we are developing moving forward from here. So I hope that answers your question. So we are at 5:19 right now in Malaysian timing. So we do have another 10 minutes. So if we have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the question box. All right, so it seems that there are no more questions coming in. So I think we will end the webinar here. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation in this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My email address is stated in this slide deck. We will share the slide deck with the participants, and we will put this recording up on the website along with the announcement for the public consultation. So what we will do is we will add this recording into that same page where you can download the documents, you can download the Q&A form, and you can listen to the webinar there. If you do have any questions with regards to the public consultation, do reach out. We will be available to you, and we will try as much as possible to answer any questions even after this webinar is over. And we really look forward to your contribution in this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.